Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on the Prime Minister's message heading into today's meeting with the premiers. But first, navigating the trade turmoil.
I'm hopeful that before the end of the year, we can have at least options for President Trump and the leaders of Canada and or Mexico to consider potential interim arrangements.
Jamieson Greer testifying before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee. Earlier this month, Greer said the U.S. would not renew the Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade deal, moving the agreement into annual reviews that could continue for up to 10 years before expiring. And all of this playing out as trade tensions heighten with the Trump administration's announcement of a 50% tariff on a wide range of Canadian goods. So to help shed some light on the situation, we're joined now by Carlo Day, Director of International Policy and the New North American Initiative at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. Carlo, good to see you, sir. Welcome back.
Good to see you, Mike.
All right, this threat of 50% tariffs and possibly more, how should that be viewed? Is this simply about pressuring, bullying Canada into submission?
Yes, absolutely. The U.S. administration is doing a lot of negotiating in public, and this is part of it. Stories like this on the media are part of the aims of the U.S. Imposing tariffs and the communications you hear from the White House and also from USTR. But these tariffs are different and unique from the others that we've experienced and also from the other powers that the president has. These tariffs uniquely can be applied at the subnational level, meaning at the provincial level. The administration so far has chosen not to do that, but this opens up a whole new front in terms of our engagement with the Americans, the ability of the president to single out a particular province for action and not to tariff other provinces. That's on the table now.
Okay, so with that in mind, why are the Americans appearing so frustrated over provinces responding with things like booze bans and Canada being one of the very few nations refusing to capitulate?
Well, you've hit the nails on the head. Canada, only two countries, and every Canadian that goes to Washington to meet with the administration, when I was at USTR a couple of months ago, they made the point very clearly. There are only two countries that have dared to impose retaliatory tariffs. And they say, as the Americans say, and both countries begin with the C, meaning the other one's China. But this isn't just about us or just about China. The Americans are undertaking negotiations with pretty much every country on the planet to reestablish or to establish new trade rules, new trade ties, new engagements, new tariffs. Just 2 days ago, Jordan became the 21st country to capitulate to the Americans and to take a trade deal that's worse than what they have, that has higher tariffs than what they have in the U.S.-Jordan Free Trade Agreement. So the Americans, as I say, using the old Chinese proverb, are killing a chicken to scare the monkeys. And Mexico and Canada happen to be the chicken. But Canada, retaliatory tariffs, personally upset in Washington, but also strategically, the broader global game and sending a message. And Canada is being used to send a message.
To your point that the Americans appear to be negotiating in public, what then is likely happening behind the scenes that we are not seeing, where Canada is concerned?
This is a good question, and you really have to be in the room, I think, to understand. Clearly, what we can see that has shown in public is that part of this pressure campaign is to engage Mexico ahead of Canada. For several reasons, correct, I think. The Mexicans realize that, or the Americans realize that Mexican dependency is even greater than Canadian dependency. Mexico is also an easier sell on U.S. policy to contain and limit other countries from trading with China. That makes Mexico a perfect additional lever point for Canada. Mexico isn't doing this because of Canada. They're simply a victim of U.S. pressure and the economic structure of their relationship. So that's something else that I think we're going to be seeing soon. The Americans are in Mexico, formal talks with the Mexicans. They're not in Canada. They're not planning to come to Canada. That, again, is negotiating in public.
Okay, so how much of an actual strategy do you see the Carney government employing through all of this, and is it sticking to said plan?
I think the plan has been not to be forced into hasty negotiations with the Americans. Look, there is no good deal on the table. 21 countries, no one got a deal that was anything but worse than what they had before. Thinking that we're going to be different, that rushing to make concessions will give us something that Argentina, the EU, Japan, Korea didn't get, I think is nonsensical, to be blunt about it. So the Carney government appears to realize that we have the best deal going. If we rush to make concessions, it's not going to improve our position, but it's only going to strengthen the Americans' hand. So we need to proceed, emphasis on proceed, not stall, not stay back, but we need to proceed a bit more slowly and deliberately than other countries have gone. If your negotiating partners deliberately pushing you into haste for any negotiation, that's a symbol that you probably don't want to follow their lead and proceed with haste.
To carry that point forward, is there value in retaliation, hitting back where there might be leverage, be that electricity out of Ontario or even the flow of oil out of Alberta?
It's the absolute worst thing we can do. The Americans are harming the U.S. economy, harming U.S. consumers, harming U.S. businesses with these tariffs. The last thing we want to do is follow their example and inflict more harm on Canadian businesses, more harm on Canadian consumers, more harm on Canadian consumers. Look, if someone's digging their own grave, your first instinct shouldn't be to fight them for the shovel. And that's hard for Canadians to hear because ego's involved, national pride's involved. But if you look at the 21 other countries, and if you look at Mexico, other countries have managed to swallow their pride and think with their heads instead of their hearts. You know, as Don Cherry would say, you're skating towards the blue line. It's time to get your elbows down and get your head up. And that's what we need in Canada, move from emotion to intellect and being smart about this,
all right,
as hard as it may be.
Indeed. We'll have to leave it there, Carlo. As always, appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Carlo Dade, Director of International Policy and the new North American Initiative at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. From getting a read on the federal government's response to Trump tariffs escalation to the Premier's pitching a unity tent. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, political analyst John Santos and Rob Breckenridge, writer, broadcaster, and Calgary Herald columnist. And good evening to you both. Let's begin with the Prime Minister's message ahead on tariff turmoil heading into the meeting with premiers in Charlottetown this morning.
We are in a stronger position than we were when this trade war started 18 months ago. We're in a stronger position because of the determination of Canadians themselves, and I will say this, because of the focus of the premiers around this table.
By far the most pressing issue around the First Minister's table, the U.S. President's decision this week to impose a 50% tariff on Canadian goods starting August 19th. The Premier's also looking to discuss the lack of progress on renewing the North American Free Trade Agreement. John, I'll start with you. Your read on the PM's message there going into that meeting with the Premiers. Is Canada in a stronger position than when the trade war started?
Yeah, I think so. There's been a lot of investment that not just the federal government, but various provinces have put into expanding access to new markets, sort of reshoring domestic capacity, getting Canadians to rally around the flag in the face of the American trade war. And so, yes, I think Canada is in a better position, and the Prime Minister struck the right tone by giving credit to the premiers, and not taking it all for himself and his government, because he needs them on board going into the negotiations with the Americans. So yeah, I think the nation is stronger, and the Prime Minister struck all of the right notes in his messaging to acknowledge why that's the case.
Now, Rob, we heard from University of Calgary trade expert Carlo Dade off the top. In your way of looking at this, is there a Canadian strategy here? And is the government, the Carney government, sticking to it?
Well, it's tough to have a strategy, in light of what we're facing on the other side. And I think we see this week evidence of kind of where the Americans are coming from and how things can turn on a dime. I mean, this sudden new deal around the Gordie Howe International Bridge, the Windsor-Detroit crossing, where it's a sense of, from the American perspective or the White House perspective, it's a privilege to deal with us. And we're going to make sure things are favorable on our terms, and you're going to be happy with that. And I think that's the approach they've taken to trade. The other thing, though, is that these new tariffs we've seen for the first time are in violation of CUSMA. So there's no more CUSMA exemptions here in some of these new tariffs. So what that also indicates is how much faith can we put in a new deal? What's that worth if months from now or sooner or later Donald Trump decides he's mad about something else and he's going to go against that agreement? So how much is this actually worth, and how much faith can we put in that? And if that's in question, what's all of this working up to? I think part of the Canadian strategy, and Carlo alluded to it, this kind of ragging the puck strategy of recognizing that, at least for now, it's a worsened status quo, but it might actually be better than further concessions we would need to make on a deal. So maybe it does make sense to delay all of this, see what happens with the courts, see what happens with the midterm elections. But, at the same time, too, let's keep in mind the Americans have claimed that we were actually very close to a deal back in the fall before they got upset over the Doug Ford, Ronald Reagan ads. So sometimes it's hard to know where things are at, and it's obviously a moving strategy with everything going on here.
John, there is that sense that the Americans are upset. So how likely is this Trump administration to continue turning the screws until it gets its ultimate goal, whatever that might be?
I think it's very likely. And as Carlo Dade said, they're negotiating in public. And I agree entirely with what Rob said about how it's impossible to really come up with a strategy when, your opponent is unpredictable, deliberately malicious, and doesn't abide by the conventional rules of reason. And so I think, to continue the hockey analogy, that Canada needs to continue ragging the puck, but ultimately the longer term strategy needs to extend beyond this season, and picking up some new draft picks and building up the team a little bit differently, again, to continue the hockey analogy. And that's the long-term goal of making Canada, the Canadian economy, less reliant on the Americans, doing more of our own manufacturing, our own R&D, to the extent that that we can pull it off, and that ultimately has to be the long-term goal, because while Donald Trump might go away, Trumpism is not going to go away, and all around the world we're seeing this retreat from free trade, not just from the Americans, but this general sentiment around the world. So yeah, the longer term strategy needs to be more self-reliance.
Rob, you mentioned the Gordie Howe Bridge a moment ago. Your column in the National Post today calls on the Prime Minister to come clean on changes to the deal on the revenue sharing agreement between the two nations. What kind of light do you feel that situation has left the PM in?
Not a good one, which was surprising. I think, Canadians have given him some leeway here, some benefit of the doubt when it comes to dealing with Donald Trump, who's very unpredictable, belligerent, all of that. But to try to spin this deal as a positive or sort of hide or downplay those negatives, especially when that one was inevitably all going to come to light, was just very bizarre and short-sighted. And I think it raises some questions. If they're going to try to downplay or deny negatives or concessions moving forward in dealing with the Americans, what does that tell us about their willingness to be forthright with Canadians about what they might have to give on moving forward here if we really are getting into some serious negotiations? So I think we need to understand what's at stake here, what the Americans are asking of us, what we're prepared to concede, and why we're doing so. But for the Prime Minister to sort of portray this as, no, this is fine, this is, just how we wanted it, when clearly was that not the case, I don't think that builds that trust and that relationship with Canadian. I think it erodes that trust that's been there. That's kind of been, I think, a political asset for him.
So John, I'll ask you, to what degree do you see the Gordie Howe Bridge situation serving to erode the trust of Canadians in the PM?
I mean, Rob's right in like a capital T objective truth sense, but I think at this point, at the height of summer, I'm not sure many folks other than like the super engaged are paying attention. And I think as long as this doesn't become a recurring pattern of trying to obfuscate the concessions that have been made in order to get some kind of a deal off the ground, I think most Canadians, the average voter, is going to give the Prime Minister a pass. But it can't be part of a pattern, because then I think that's when we could start to see the erosion of trust that the general public has so far continued to have in Mark Carney's government.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, how the premiers and a proposed pipeline fit into this whole national unity equation. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. With the threat of Trump tariffs looming ever large, national unity has been a focal point during this week's meeting of premiers and PEI. And while Manitoba's Wab Kinew has been critical in the past of Alberta and Premier Smith over talk of separation, his province is now open to the suggestion of an oil pipeline from our province to Ontario.
Having spent a few days in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba last week, I can tell you there's probably a lot of people who'd like to work on a pipeline. So I'm open to it, and if it's going to make Canada stronger, great. But of course, we want to see things done in the right way.
After 2 days of closed-door meetings, the premiers say they support a strong and united Canada. How far that support extends, though, remains a bit of a question, while Ontario's Doug Ford has mused about retaliatory measures like a surcharge on Ontario electricity heading south of the border and using oil as similar leverage. Alberta's premier says that's not going to happen. Rob, what does Manitoba's embrace, or at least that of Premier Kinew, suggest about how premiers around this table are willing to bend to present a united front?
Well, it certainly shows how the politics around these projects have changed, and much of that has to do with what we were just talking about, the changing relationship with the United States, the need to try to diversify our trading partners, and I think that's what this new West Coast pipeline is meant to achieve. This Alberta to Ontario pipeline is kind of a different equation, and so it's symbolically, I think, valuable to see Manitoba's premier come on board, to see this sort of consensus. This is a very political kind of project, the idea of a pipeline on Canadian soil from one part of Canada to another. The big problem here, and it sort of goes against what Danielle Smith is talking about, the importance of maintaining trade with the United States. We have a pipeline from Alberta to Sarnia, Ontario, but it's the Enbridge main line, and that includes Line 5, which cuts across Michigan. That's Enbridge's pipeline system. Enbridge is, in fact, about to increase the capacity in its mainline system. So are we really going to build a pipeline that competes against an existing pipeline, or to actually force this company to take a huge loss by saying, we don't want product going through your pipeline anymore, we're going to build this new one at a cost of tens of billions of dollars? So there's all kinds of challenges around that particular project, but I think this political symbolism of a united front front. We support these projects. The public supports these projects. That's very much where things are at right now.
John, what signal is Manitoba sending, maybe to Alberta in particular, with this willingness to talk pipelines? Is this Wob Canoe asking for something in return?
Maybe. I don't know. I think this is just emblematic of sort of the position that Wob Canoe has taken when you look at all of the political leaders in Canada together. He has very good relations with other political leaders regardless of their party. And while a lot of people have made a big deal of Premier Canoe calling out Premier Smith, in terms of her views on the duty to consult. He also said, after that last meeting that the First Ministers had, that, Albertans have been feeling left out and that they need a bit of a hug. And so, Wob Canoe, much like the geographical position of Manitoba, is sort of this like central figure that's bridging across different parties, across different sides of different issues. And I think this is just Uncle Wob trying to be, a broker that can, bring different sides of an issue together. And so I think, this is just a continuation of this position that he's sort of found himself in as like a centrist, a broker, a middle person in the Federation.
Rob, in terms of the unity bond behind closed doors, how do you read any degree of division that may exist between the premiers? Ontario's Doug Ford, BC's David Eby, they seem eager to retaliate, yet premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan, not so much.
No, and we've seen that dynamic really over the past year and a half. So that part isn't new. I think there's less of a confrontational approach maybe between the premiers. And of course, you just had Doug Ford in Alberta talking about this pipeline that we were just talking about, where, it was all smiles, positivity between Danielle Smith and Doug Ford. So I don't think you're going to see them clash publicly around all of this. There may be some more intense conversations behind closed doors. There seems to be a desire on everybody's part here to present more of a Team Canada approach. But I think ultimately, premiers have different interests. And these new tariffs do hit Ontario and BC disproportionately harder than other provinces, Alberta included. So, of course, you're going to get different kinds of reactions from premiers on top of their kind of well-established position. So that's not new, but I think there's more of an attempt or an effort going into this to at least try to maintain more of a united front.
John, how much pressure do you expect the PM was under from the premiers today to lay out actual plans on finding a way forward with the Trump administration? How testy a conversation might that have been?
I think he's under a lot of pressure. And as Rob mentioned, there's probably an unwillingness of all political leaders to do too much bickering in public, because that's always bad in terms of negotiating power. And so if none of that is coming out in public, then it's all going to come out in private. And given the conflicts between the different premiers in terms of how hard their provinces are being hit by the tariffs, that's going to cause them to take different positions, and they're going to make that known to the Prime Minister.
Rob, last 30 to you. How active a role should be expected of the provinces in finding that way forward as the clock ticks down on the latest Trump deadline?
Well, I think the Prime Minister is clearly in the driver's seat in terms of how he responds, but I think it's important to him to try to, as much as possible, have the premiers on board, have a united front, and, remember, when it comes to the booze bans, which is a key irritant as far as the Americans are concerned right now, that's happening at the provincial level. So it makes the premiers a little bit more relevant in all of this, too.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Michael.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News. It's about President Trump's tariff strategy facing Senate scrutiny. Grumpy author writes he's only doing it because he needs to fund his unlawful war. Diane weighs in with Trump started all this trade uncertainty by his bullying tactics. He expects Canadians to roll over and take it without any fight. It's time to turn the tables. From CP, it seems the American government is finally stepping up to stop stop Trump. No matter how Trump spins it, the USA needs Canada. Julian strongly supporting Premiers Eby and Ford. No more deal with Trump. And Martin offers this to the commander-in-chief. Hey, Trump, only a fool does the same thing twice, expecting a different result. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, Mayor Cory DeMano on Banff's busy summer season with the Canada Strong Pass back in place, plus Alberta referendum questions and how they relate to the local Banff workforce. That's on Friday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.